Hello, I'm Mimi and today I'm looking for some inspiration to illustrate something cute and happy for springtime. This video is sponsored by Mimimoo and I'll be using their planning software to make myself a sweet inspiration board for spring, and then I'll use that inspiration to create a simple illustration to post on Instagram. I really enjoy making mood boards or vision boards, and while it's lovely to make physical ones, I find it a lot easier to make digital boards, especially as I'm going to be taking my work overseas. It's simpler to have everything in one place online. Mimimoo is a tool that I've spoken about before for organizing creative projects, and it feels a lot like making a physical mood board where you can take ideas, notes and images and stick them all down on a big board, except that it's digital, and I can also collect images and links from around the internet and collate them in one space, which is just super handy for inspiration. So like I said, today I'm making a board for spring, so I'll make a whole new board and change the little icon and the color to make it feel spring themed. There are lots of handy templates to choose from on Mimimoo, but I'm going to start with a blank spread so that I can start from scratch. Just like I've done for my other mood boards, I want to make a board full of photo inspiration, a color palette, and some general ideas for this theme that I can draw. So to start my board, I'm going to search for some springtime images on Pinterest and see which images fit the aesthetic that I'm going for. Mimimoo actually has a browser extension, so I have this little save button come up in the corner of all the photos on this page, and if I save them, they come up on the side ready to save to my mood board. When I've picked a few images for my board that I think could spark some cute illustration ideas, I can just tell it to save to my spring inspiration board, and then back over on Mimimoo, they're ready to drag and drop to my board. You can also upload images that you've saved to your device, but I find this way to be super easy and saves me the fuss of downloading anything. So I can put these anywhere I want and resize them. I think I want more pastel colors on this board and flowers and cute little animals, so I'll collect a few more images. The whole point of this board is to help spark some ideas for spring illustrations, so I'm looking for what kind of colors to use and what kinds of animals and flowers fit with spring that I like the look of. I'll rearrange my images with a bit of space free in the middle, and then I'm going to make a color palette so I can just drag in a color square. And a feature that I really like about Mimimoo is that I can just use the eyedropper tool to take colors directly from the photos on my board. I can still adjust them a bit, but it makes for a really great starting point. At springtime, there are lots of greens, pinks, oranges, and yellows with some soft purples too. So I'm going to build a little palette based on the colors in these images that I think I'm most likely to use in a spring illustration. When I build a color palette, I try to include a range of values, which is basically how light or dark a color is. So I include some colors that are really light in value, like the yellow, and some colors with a darker value, like the second green, to make sure I have some variety. I also mostly use palettes as a starting point for my illustrations and adjust the colors as I need to for a specific illustration, so this palette can really just be for inspiration and a guide, and I can play with the colors a little bit more when I do my digital illustration. So now that I have some lovely spring images and a color palette, I'm starting to get some ideas for spring illustrations, and I want to jot a few of them down so that I can easily come back to them anytime. I'll drag a little to-do list onto my board so that I can list them and also tick them off if I want to. And Mimimoo asks me if I want to add a title to this to-do list, which is nice of them, so I'll call these spring illustration ideas. I think it would be cute to draw some bumblebees with flowers, maybe a little lamb sleeping in a field, a cottage garden with lots of spring flowers in it, some kind of gardening character maybe even to go along with that. Or I could even draw a flower as if it were a house itself. So those are some drawing concept ideas, but I'll also make another separate list of just individual characters that I could base a spring illustration on or add to a scene. So things like birds, hedgehogs, cows, or even a little worm. So I'm just gonna lay everything out on my board so that it fits nicely. And now I have so many ideas from this inspiration board that I can come back to anytime I want to draw a spring illustration. Now you can try Milanote for free, so if you want to make your own board like this, then give it a try and see if you like it, because I think it's such a nice visual way to collect inspiration. Now I'm excited to draw something, so let me show you my illustration process and jump into Photoshop, where I'm going to set up an artboard at 3000 by 3000 pixels in RGB color mode. You can do pretty much everything I do today in Photoshop in Procreate, and I'm sure most other digital art software as well, so you can still see my process even if you don't use Photoshop yourself. I've downloaded my Milanote board as a PNG, and I'll just drag it onto my canvas to easily reference as I need. The main thing that I want to reference from the board is the color palette, so I'm going to use the eyedropper tool to select each of the colors and then paint a small splodge in the corner on a new layer, so that as I'm drawing I can quickly reference those colors again. So I'm thinking that today I'd like to draw something based on this cute duckling with a daffodil hanging over them, because I just think it could turn out really cute. I always start with a sketch of my composition where I plot out the main parts of my illustration and refine as I go. The great thing about digital art is that it's so easy to erase and manipulate and resize parts of your sketch, so it makes it a really flexible process, and to me that takes all the pressure off, because it really doesn't matter if I don't draw it well the first time, I can always adjust it. So I want to have this tall daffodil kind of pointing downwards towards this little duckling sitting on the floor. I want them to be really quite round and cute with big eyes and their little feet sticking out in front of them. I'm using a sketching brush that I made last year that isn't actually in my official brush pack. I wonder if I should make a second pack with sketching and more pencil style brushes this year, because I do like using them. I would just need to make a couple more so I can make them a set. So now that I'm happy with my sketch, I want to be able to use this layer as a reference and have it sitting above everything else that I draw, but I need to be able to see through it, so I'll make it multiply blend mode and about 30% opacity. The opacity makes it see-through, and the multiply blend mode means that my lines will be multiplied by any colors on layers below, so it just makes it really easy to always see my sketch clearly. My process now is to color in the illustration using that sketch layer as a reference. And I'll just keep it there until I'm finished referencing it, and later on I'll hide that layer. I'm adding my colors on new layers below the sketch, and generally my rule is that different colors or different elements go on separate layers, which makes it easy for me to add shading to different areas later on. So the body of this duckling is all on one layer. The wing at the back I put on its own layer so that I can make it darker really easily. And I'll draw the little feet together on a separate layer to the body because it's a darker color and a different element, so I'll want to shade that independently of the body. Really, you can do your layers however you like. I find it easiest to separate most things because it gives more flexibility, and I can be quite indecisive sometimes, so it gives me the freedom to adjust things like colors later on. Now I really do just go through and color everything in like a coloring book really. It's quite a relaxing part of the process, and I can listen to music or a podcast while I do it, and it's nice to see the characters come to life in color. I prefer to color everything in first before I start adding shading or texture, although I might add details as I go like I did with the duckling's feathers. I'm mostly referencing the colors in the palette we made from the Moodboard, but just adjusting them a bit as I go if I want them to be a bit more vibrant or darker. My colors are usually on the lighter end during this stage because I'm going to go through and add texture and shading next, which will make them darker and more saturated, so I'm not too worried about them being quite light at the moment. I like giving flowers smiling faces because it gives them personality and a little bit of interaction with other characters, and I think I'd be happy if I were a flower too. Once I've colored everything in, I can hide the sketch layer because I just don't need to reference that anymore. So the next part of my process is to go through each of the elements that I've drawn and give them some shading and texture. And I can do both of those at the same time with my texture brushes. This is where it really comes in handy that I've drawn different elements on their own layers, because as I shade areas darker, it doesn't interfere with the other elements. You might notice that as I'm shading, it's not going over the edges of my shapes, and that's because I'm drawing my shading on new layers and making those layers clipping masks. I do have a whole video tutorial about clipping masks and adding texture over on my Patreon for both Photoshop and Procreate, but basically clipping masks are their own layers and you can draw on them as normal, but they're clipped to the shape below them and the rest is invisible or masked. The clipping mask kind of makes the shape that it's clipped to a little window into whatever you're drawing on that layer. And it's just a convenient way of masking your texture and shading to the shape that you're drawing it onto. So I just go through pretty much every element in my illustration and add some nice broad texture with my texture brushes and also some more defined shading. And I love how the texture takes something flat and brings it to life. If you want to use these texture brushes for yourself, they work in Photoshop and Procreate. They're on my Etsy shop, so I can leave the link to them in my description below. This is where I can really add contrast as well to separate colors and keep some areas light and make other areas more vibrant. I love that this simple scene has come from collecting inspiration on my mood board, and I think it's turned out so cute for spring. The last thing that I want to add is a sweet rainbow in the background to bring in some more of those pastel colors, although I'm not sure they showed up so well on my screen recorder, so here's the final image and I'll be posting it on my Instagram account, so pop over there to see it as well. I had such a nice time making this mood board and showing you the full process from inspiration through to final digital illustration, and definitely give Mimimoo a go if you're needing an inspiration boost yourself. It's free to get started, really easy to use, and such a nice tool for visual people. And if you enjoyed seeing my digital art process, there are plenty more videos like this where I share my process and also real-time illustration videos over on my Patreon, so be sure to check that out as well. Thanks so much for watching this video. Consider giving it a like and subscribe if you haven't already for more art content, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye!